All right, now the different kinds of research types under the methodology, like survey, case control, cohort, ecological, randomized control trials, and all. If you look these research types very carefully, and the way I analyzed and the way I read through different literatures and the materials online, I found out that these can be divided into subgroups of observational studies and experimental or interventional studies. So, observational studies are those studies which are done through mere observation of or through just mere observation. You do not need any experiment, do not need any intervention on this one. Just a mere intervention suffices objective. And experimental are where mere observation is not enough for us. We need to go and act, we need to go and intervene on that observed phenomenon. That's when we are manipulating one of the variables from two or three. For example, let's just give a very simplest example. We are observing a citrus field, an orange field, and we see that the citrus is affected by some disease. And that disease, if you just leave up to observational studies, it's not going to happen anything else. So through experimental studies, we are going to intervene with some treatments, and basically we are going to treat that disease by, for example, one of the variable can be treatment with some insecticide. So we'll keep one citrus field having disease and one citrus field not having any kind of disease. So citrus field which are having disease, we apply treatment, and citrus field which are not having any kind of disease, again we apply some treatment, and we try to see what are the difference in the treatment. So basically the variable that we are changing or manipulating is the treatment variable. So we are basically trying to see whether that treatment is working or not. So if that is not working, then we try to change the treatment to treatment B. So again treatment C, D, and until we see a good result. So that's basically experiments, not just observing, but we are intervening ourselves and changing few variables. So few of many different kinds of studies or research under observational studies are descriptive, survey. Descriptive studies and surveys are most of the time taken up together, but for this one we'll study quite separately. Then we have got correlational, ecological studies, cross-sectional studies, cohort, case study, case control studies. There are lots of other studies again, but for our ease purpose and just for this research methods class sake, we'll be studying only this observational studies. And under the experimental or interventional, we will be looking at, mainly we'll be focusing at randomized control trials. Yes, first let us see all the studies that were listed under the observational studies. Again, to go back, observational studies are just from the mere observation of anything, like it can be a person, it can be any subject, it can be an environment, it can be nature, it can be a phenomenon, just observing, and we are drawing conclusion from the study. First study is called as a descriptive study. Any person can describe anything else at any place at any time, and we basically can describe anything else. We are not correlating anything else, we are not associating one variable with another variable, we are not complicating the matter, we are just describing the facts. So descriptive statistics like frequency, sample mean, standard deviation, median, mode are those of many statistics that are given by descriptive studies. So let's say we are studying BMI of the students in a class, and in the descriptive studies we basically list down the age. We basically have body height, body weight, BMI index, then mother's education, father's education. We're not doing anything that's complicating, not anything that's uh, relevant to association, correlation, variation. We're not looking at that one, just describing the fact. And the good thing about descriptive study is that uh, it includes basically any information that a person wants to know. So basically, it answers any questions. It satisfies any question that's being asked. It describes fact. It describes fact, describe or discover new facts again. But please remember, invention is not a part of descriptive studies. Invention, if you have to invent, we need to do more than descriptive studies. Descriptive is just describing something else. Then we solve problems from descriptive studies. So basically, frequency, mean, median, mode, standard deviation, and basic descriptive statistics is all about descriptive studies. But most of the time, if you have to do any thesis, for example, if you want to look at diversity and distribution of butterfly in Wangdi and Punakha Chongkak, in that case, you may want to start your result in discussion with descriptive studies, descriptive statistics. Second one is survey. So most of the time, survey and descriptive studies go hand in hand, parallel. But for this sake, I've just taken out survey to study separately. We have social survey and very broad survey, two level of surveys. A social survey is basically asking questions to people, interviewing people, and anything that relates to asking question, and that question is being answered by people, and that answer, if you are noting down through pencil and paper feedback form, to a very intensive one-to-one in-depth interview, can also be a survey. Basically, a survey is any description that you go to a place and you describe about something else. And in general, the other kind of survey, not the social survey, a general survey is basically a general overview of someone or something, examination, description, or of someone or something. So in our sector, the relevant survey can be National Forest Inventory. That's a survey that is quite relevant for us. So that also can be a survey, and social survey can also be a form of survey for us. Social survey, in the case of social survey, or if it is any kind of general survey, like forest survey, it starts with defining a research questions, and all that question should have some kind of format to ask the questions. If you are going to do a social survey, then you should also form some kind of standard tool or some kind of standard forms to how to do the interview in advance. And then you edit the questions, sequence the questions, refine the survey instrument, and choose a sampling strategy. Then continue like the other kind of studies where you decide your number of samplings. Then how would you like to throw the sampling? Is it like through random, systematic, purposive, convenience? So that's on you, and then you start analyzing that data and reporting the conclusion and all. So survey is something that we're going to look at again and again in Unit 4. So we'll again park this to Unit 4 to study in depth. Next study that is under observational study is correlational study, where basically we have got two or more variables, and we're basically trying to see the association between these two variables. Let's say in this one, we have taken a person's weight and height throughout his or her age. At 1 year old, the weight was around 20 kgs. Oh, that's quite high, 1 year. But let's say this is just an example, and at the height was around 35 feet. Then that it goes like this with the age. So we are basically trying to see whether there is an association between height and weight as the age progresses. And in this case, we see that there is a positive correlation where the association is increasing when one is when one variable increases, the other variable also increases. So that's a positive correlation. There can be also negative correlation. There can be also no correlation at all. So if they are strong, how strong? If there is weak, how weak? If there is negative, how negative? And correlation is generally represented by R equal to not more than 1. My weight compared to my own weight again, the correlation will be 1 or 100% because it's my weight that's being compared with again my weight. But if I compare my weight with some other person's weight over the age, like over the period of certain like few months or years, I can see that the increase in my weight may not increase his weight, or sometimes when his weight increases, my weight may not increase. So we may not have a very strong correlation, and R will not be 9, R will not be equal to 1, R may be less than 1, R may be even less than 5. So looking at the value of R, we can predict that the strength of correlation is high or lower. So a value of R equal to 1 is 100% correlation, 100% positive correlation. A value of R equal to 0.8 to 1 is considered as a very strong correlation, strong positive, because we're not looking at the decrease of one variable and increase of another variable. We're not looking at that, but we're looking at increase of one variable leading to increase of another variable. So that's positive correlation. And R less than 0.8 to R around 0.6, we can call that as high positive correlation. And from 0.6 to 0.5 can be a moderate correlation. 0.4 to 0.3 can be very weak correlation. And from 0.4 to 0 can be very, very less positive correlation. And again, negative correlation works the same way. So in this one, here we have got very strong correlation, positive correlation. Here we have got weak positive correlation. R is equal to 0.6. Again, the classification of R, like I said, a strong, high, medium, weak, very weak. Again, depends on paper to paper, article to article, person to person again. So try to look at that one on your own. So basically, there are 3 kinds of correlation research that we can do: positive correlation research, negative correlation research, and zero correlation research. So zero correlation research is when increase in one variable is not being affected by increase in another variable. So there is basically no correlation at all. Best example can be increase in consumption of petrol by your car, and height growth, your height growth, and the increase in consumption of petrol by the car. Let's say my height growth and increase in petrol consumption of my car. Though the data is quite good, I see my height growth from my younger age to till now, and I can even see the increased consumption of car petrol over a few years of time. But it doesn't make any sense whether increase in one is related to increase in my height or not. It doesn't make any sense because sometimes decrease in the petrol may or may not change anything, and that's regarding the height. So that's on with zero correlation research. The next one under observational studies is ecological study. Again, very widely very widely taken up study in the field of research is ecological study. We do not look at individual in this kind of study. We look at population, or we look at the group level in ecological study. And uh, uh, the care must be given to or care must be taken when we are generalizing from our results, which is actually from the group or the population to the person who we are applying to. For example, um, our study may show that um, people in Laya are strong, usually strong, through or usually have a good or fair stamina or strength. But at individual level, we need to check whether our study really matters at individual level or not. But in group, our study matters. So ecological study basically is a study which is targeted mainly to population or group level, but not to individual level. Another kind of study that is under observational study is case study. Here we are looking at a program, an event, an activity, or a process, or one individual or group of individual over a very specific period of time, place, or by activity. So we're not uh, generalizing things over here. In case study, we are quite focused on our study subject. For example, if you want to study this boy, then we're not going to study every student in his class, every relative that he has. We're going to just uh, stick with uh, his profile. So what is his age, what are his interests, what are his hobbies. We are basically just going to spend some specified period of time with him and ask specified questions to him, and that's it. So a case study is basically uh, uh, case study is basically a comprehensive understanding of a subject by spending quite uh, more amount of time with that subject. So Stick and Croswell stated that case study involves collection of detailed information using a variety of data collection procedures over sustained period of time. So period of time is a very important criteria in case study. A method of learning about a complex instance based on comprehensive understanding of that instance be obtained by extensive description and analysis of that instance taken as a whole. So here it says that, for example, an instance is something else that we are going to study, and we are having or we are trying to have a comprehensive understanding of that instance, and we are analyzing this instance to get a good understanding about this instance. Yes, what a riddle here. But for example, uh, if we want to study the online teaching method as our case, so online teaching method as our case, then we need to pick a time frame. So okay, we are going to study the effect of online teaching and learning on tertiary students. Then we are going to start by, let's say, by May 10 to let's say by August 10. So May 10 to August 10 is our specific time frame. Then place is specific place, forestry, year 3 CNR. And then we are going to observe the students, how they are coping up with the online teaching and learning, and we are basically going to have a very comprehensive knowledge about how online teaching and learning is affecting the students' learning ability. So case study is all about focusing to one person or one individual or group of individual or program or event and activity or process at a sustained period of time. So another form of study that we have under observational study is case control studies. In this one, we basically spot in a population which are affected group and which are non-affected group. For example, um, uh, in a population, let us say that we want to see the cause of common flu in Wangdi area, let's say. In Wangdi area, or let's say, let's just narrow down to CNR. In CNR, let's say that currently we have got common flu, and population which are having common flu, the group which are having common flu will segregate as the case group, and the group which we do not have the common flu will be segregated as control group. So case control is written now, and over a certain period of time, uh, we are going to study why the case having the common flu group got the common flu and how did they get, and the control group, why and how did not they get the common flu. So we basically targeting these two concept groups to understand the exposure, to understand the actual cause that made this common flu to be common flu to infect this uh, group of people under the case. Another example that's relevant to environmental studies is that uh, let's spot a forest with bark beetle infestation. So we are going to segregate the forest into two parts. One is bark beetle infested forest, and another one is a forest which is not being infested by bark beetle. And over some certain period of time, we observe the bark beetle infested group to know the reason why bark beetle has invested in that group of trees. And in control group, we will try to study why bark beetle did not infest in the control group. So by those kind of studies, we'll know how and why bark beetle got infested in the forest and what are the ways that we can stop to have bark beetle infestation. So basically, we have to know two things. We have got cases and we have got controls over here. The other kind of study is cross-sectional studies. This study is a study which is taken at a specified point of time or a specific point of time. A cross-section is just dissecting anything else at one point. So right now we are looking at the time. So cross-sectional study is any kind of study that deals with studying of something else, studying of someone, studying of a disease, studying of a diversity or distribution of something else at one specified point of time. So commonly called as a snapshot in time. And this is most of the time done in prevalence studies and epidemiological studies. Let's say we want to find out cholesterol measurement and ECG measured at same time, and we go to a patient and we measure cholesterol level in that patient's body, and we also try to measure ECG in that patient's body, and whatever result we get is the result of that point of time, and it's not going to be related with the past point, or it's not going to be related with the future data. So whatever we get at a specific point of time, that's the result. So here I got an example of kids who do not wear glasses. So at that point of time, I just got the data of kids who are wearing glasses and who are not wearing glasses, and these are the kids who are not wearing glasses. So nothing to get confused with this one. It's just a data that's derived from a specified point of time. A distinction between longitudinal study from cross-sectional study is that cross-sectional study is at one point of time, while longitudinal study is for a certain period of time. So for example, if you want to trace back the disease in a person from whether that disease has been carried in that person from his infant stage, then we go back to its infant data, infant health records, and we try to see whether that person was having the disease at the infant stage or not, and we look back his or her adolescent stages, teenage stages, and adulthood, and we try to compare that disease was there from the infant stage or not, and studying through across the time is basically what longitudinal study is all about. The next type of study under the observational study is a cohort study, more or less like a longitudinal study, or most of the time we see that it's one of the studies under longitudinal study. Cohort study is basically you are following the cohort or interested group of people who are either affected by a disease, who are either affected by something else, some factors, and we are following the group of people to know the cause of that disease, or cause of that whatever we are trying to study. So what we do is basically for example, let's say there's a severe outbreak of disease in Chirpine, and lots of Chirpine died at one point of time, and now we want to really study from the seed stage to settling stage to the full grown tree stage, and we want to see how the disease got outbreak or not, and studying from the seed to settling stage to the full blown adult tree stage is basically what cohort study is all about. So the main distinction between cross-sectional study and cohort study is the time difference. In cross-sectional study, it's at one specified point of time, while cohort study is quite longer in duration. You study from the starting of the journey of that disease or that something else that we want to study. For example, if you want to study the health of this person, let's say any if this person is having some kind of disease at uh, at his old stage, and if you want to study why he got the disease from his old stage, then we have to follow from the time when the mother got conceived, and when he was at infant stage, then childhood, then at working age and adult age, and then at older age. And we are looking at how we can spot the disease, how we can spot the factor that led to have him that disease. So basically, following that group of people, or group of interested subject, is what cohort study does. Very expensive. It's a very expensive study, but if the disease is very rare, for example, like the COVID-19 in our case, so the COVID-19 is quite rare and it's very hard for us to detect its actual cause. Then what we can do in this case is that we can do a cohort study. So we want to really see how it all started, and the best way that we can do is a person will let him or her to eat like commonly thought reasons to have COVID-19, let's say bat or snake. So we let him eat bat or snake, and we then observe what happens in his body system, his immune system, whether he's actually getting COVID-19 or not. And at last, if he gets, then our cohort study reveals that bat or snake can lead to have COVID-19 in one's body. So this is how cohort study is all about, following subject from starting to the end until we get our results. If I get any good examples right now, nothing comes in my head, but if anything good comes in my mind, I'll love to drop it in VLE. The next group of study is experimental study, where basically we are not observing the nature, not observing the phenomenon, not observing the mere subject, but we're trying to intervene ourselves. We're trying to conduct experiment and try to at least manipulate one of the variables. Let's say we have got bark beetle infestation in one forest, let's say conifer, like cheer pine, bark beetle infestation in cheer pine, and we are not merely observing, but we want to really go and make some difference in the cheer pine. And we go there and we want to treat the cheer pine. We want to kill the bark beetles, and we want to stop bark beetle infestation there. So in this kind of study, what we do is basically we come up with some kind of treatment that can that is thought to reduce the bark beetle infestation in conifer forest. So what we do is we try to increase the dose of the treatment to those trees. So let's say let's start for one tree. We start with 10 kilograms of treatment floor, or 10 kilograms of insecticide. And if it works, then that's good. But if it is not working, then we try to manipulate the treatment variable. We try to add around 15 kilograms per tree. And if it is working, then that's well and good. If it's not working, then we try to again manipulate the variable. We try to increase to 20 kilograms, and we try to manipulate, and we try to experiment whether bark beetle infestation is being decreased by this interventions or not. So a true experiment is before going to true experiment, I want to tell that there are basically three kinds of experimental study. One being the randomized control trials, which is also known as the true experiment. Another one is quasi experimental studies, and the last one is the pre-experimental studies. So from three kinds, let's study what is true experiment. A true experiment is when we have experimental group at one point, at one side. We have non-experimental or the control group at one side. So in order for us to do any kind of experiment, what we need is a case and a control, or experimental group and a control group. So in a true experiment, these two should be there. And also in a true experiment, we can choose these two groups. For example, the experimental group we can choose, the control group we can choose randomly. So these are few important characters in order for us to make the experiment true experiment. So a random assignment of participants, so participant or any group, a true experiment should have a random. For example, this is a control one and this is an experimental one. To choose this as a experiment and this as a control, we should have equal random chances to the population for us to choose these two groups. So let's say that this is the group of this is the group, or this is the population from where we are going to do experiment. We choose one group as an experimental group or treatment group and one group as a control group, and this choice is through random assignment. And in any experiment, for that experiment to qualify as a true experiment, we need to first fulfill the criteria called as random assignment. And random assignment, so second one is that we can control over independent variable. Let's say that this group of people needs to give are assigned randomly as a treatment group, and we want to test one drug. We want to test whether that drug is good for us or not. And in this treatment group, we are giving, let's say we are giving 5 ml of or 5 mg of drugs to these people. So drug is one variable and the people or these groups are another variable. So drug is an independent variable and treatment or this group of people are called as dependent variable. So people are dependent on the drug and drug is not dependent on the people. So drug taken up as an independent variable, we can manipulate by giving either 5 mg if it is working. If it is not working, then we can give around like 10 mg, 15 mg. So we try to see the changes in the different levels of the drug, and this is where the manipulation comes into play. And at last, we can call an experiment as a true experiment if we have got control group. So this is a perfect true experiment because through the population we randomly assigned treatment group and control group, and on the treatment group and control group we had a full control over the manipulation of our independent variable, here in this case drug, and at last we have got a control group. And one of the perfect example of true experiment is randomized control trials. So randomized control trials, by the name itself, through a population we are randomly assigning trials and control, and we are doing the normal follow-up as what we do in the true experiment. So random control trial is the perfect example of a true experiment. And of course, experiment, we do not have all the three criteria fulfilled like as in true experiment. In true experiment we have random assignment, but in quasi experiment we do not have random assignment. In true experiment we have control group, but in quasi we may or may not have control group. And in a true experiment we had control over manipulation of drug or independent variable or any other independent variable, that we are trying to experiment. But in quasi-experiment, we may or may not have. But most of the quasi-experiment does not have control over the manipulation of independent variable. And at last, yes, one of the examples that we can give why we need quasi-experiment and why quasi-experiments do not have random assignment is, let's say, an example of smoking and non-smoking studies. We want to see the lung capacity of a person people who are smoking and people who are not smoking, and lung capacity is our independent variable, and people who are smoking and not smoking are the dependent variable. And the first thing, random assignment, we cannot do random assignment because we just cannot mix the population, and we just cannot pick anyone as smoking and anyone as non-smoking, because people who are smoking are called as smoking. That's why in a population there is no randomization, because we have to pick people who are smoking as a smoking group and people who are not smoking as a smoking group. So no randomization here and again we cannot manipulate independent variable like lung capacity. We can never manipulate the lung capacity. So that's when quasi experiment comes into play, and it's very important. In our environmental studies example, one of the best example that I can give is choosing our soil quality of conifer forest and broadleaf forest. So we cannot choose conifer forest separately as a group from broadleaf forest, because broadleaf forest and conifer forest rarely mixes up, and conifer forest is a separate forest again. So whatever we do, we can have separate soil properties from conifer forest and separate soil properties from broadleaf forest. So that's how quasi experiment comes into play. We cannot have a random assignment, and yes, again, we cannot mix the soil types to study the different kinds of forest. We cannot manipulate the soil types in these two different forests. So most of the time this can be in nature, this can be a quasi experiment. And at last we have got pre-experiment. Again, one or other features which has to be in the true experiment is not present in pre-experiment. That's why it doesn't qualify to be a true experiment. Firstly, there's no random assignment of participant or no random assignment of our subjects to be studied. And secondly, we do not have control over we do not have control group, and we cannot study any causality from here, or we cannot study any kind of correlational studies from here, because we do not know exactly whether one factor is affecting that study area or not. Or let's say in pre-experiment, we do not have control group, we just have our experimental group, or we just have that study group. We do not have control group. Let's say we want to study the amount of again we have to get back to our conifer forest here. So let's say that we are looking at the bark beetle infestation. Let's say that we have bark beetle infestation in a conifer forest, and let's say that we have got a new insecticide to reduce the bark beetle. So in pre-experiment, let's say we do not have any control group, set for our study. We just have the bark beetle infested conifer forest. So in this case, what we can do is we can first set our uh, group which is infested by bark beetle, apply 10 milligrams of 10 milligrams of let's say insecticide, and uh, after applying 10 milligrams of like 10 kilograms of insecticide per tree, let's say after 1 month we observe it again, do a post test and observe it again, and see that whether the 10 kilograms have actually affected or decreased the bark beetle infestation in the forest or not. And again, we try to compare between the post test and the pre-test, before applying the 10 kilogram insecticide and after applying 10 kilogram insecticide, whether they are different or not. So pre-test is basically without any control group, and you exactly do not know that decrease in bark beetle infestation may be due to is maybe due to insecticide or not, because we do not have control group. We may or may not know exactly whether the insecticide is the main cause to decrease. So mainly happens with pre-test and post-test, and we can or we cannot have again manipulation of the independent variable. So in summary, looking at the three characters: randomization, group control, and group control over manipulation of independent variable. True experiment is when we have control over all the three. We have got randomization, we have got control group, then we have got our control over manipulation of independent variable. Quasi is when we do not have randomly assigned groups. We may or may not have control group. We may or may not have control over manipulation. Pre-experiment is we do not have random assignment like a bark beetle infestation group. We we do not have control group because we never started our bark beetle infestation studies with a control group. And at last, we had some manipulation over the insecticide, whether we are going to use 10 kilograms or 15 kilograms or 20 kilograms. We had some rights. So there is a manipulation of control. There is a manipulation of independent variable. So in summary, three kinds of research are based on purpose, approach, and methodology. And this is not a very distinct and separated research type, but we can take this research type in complementary to each other. It can be a flow when you are choosing your research method. If you feel that your research is based on the purpose, if you feel that your research is basic, then choose the basic research. Secondly, from the approach, if you feel that though your research is basic, now I need to look at whether it's inductive or deductive or abductive, choose the method that you want to choose. Let's say you have chosen deductive. So basic, deductive, and is your method a qualitative or quantitative or mixed method? So a mixed method, and exactly which study research, like which research time is your thesis or research based on, looking at the methodology. So is it based on the surveys? Is it based on the correlational? Is it based on the cross-sectional studies? And or is it a kind of experiment that you want to carry out? So just please do not look the types of research as a very comparative in nature, but they are not competitive in nature. They can be used complementary to each other. They can be used as a flow to deciding the research method in general.